So I want to welcome everyone to our webinar called WILPF Delegation Report Back from COP28, Putting Demilitarisation for Climate and Gender Justice on the UN Climate Talks Agenda. This webinar is organized by the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and I'm Katrin Geyer. I'm the Environment Advisor at the International Secretariat of WILPF. Next slide, please. Before we start, a reminder that this webinar will be recorded and we will upload it to WILPF's YouTube channel in both English and French, which leads me to my next point. We have interpretation in French today, and please click on the little globe in the lower bar on your Zoom to choose your preferred language. Next slide, please. And I'm sure everyone knows by now how to select your language, but if you need a refresher, here's a little graphic. Okay, hi everyone. I'm just seeing more people entering. We're just getting started and have concluded with the housekeeping. So I just want to again say hello and a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for making it to this webinar today, as we are nearing the end of this year and many of us are already on holidays. Next slide, please. Oh no, sorry, that's the right slide. That's the right slide. Okay, so with COP28 coming to a close in Dubai last week, after nearly 2 weeks of negotiations, talks, and actions, and with the WILPF delegation's active participation throughout these 2 weeks, we want to offer some analysis, insights, and personal reflections around the challenges and wins in this space, and in particular as it relates to our work on centering demilitarisation for climate and gender justice. WILPF participated at COP28 with an official delegation of 5 feminist peace activists, Ola, Nesma, Rula, Michelle, and myself. And we worked hard to put the topic of demilitarisation and peace on the agenda of COP28. Next slide, please. I hope that all of you will have some understanding around why WILPF focuses on the role of militarisation in the context of the climate crisis. We hosted various webinars on this topic ahead of COP28, and we also published a fact sheet, which, in case you aren't as familiar with the links, you're welcome to consult for a quick refresher. But just to say that in this webinar, we won't be going into the connections and links between the climate crisis and militarisation, but we really will be focusing on our experiences and analysis around this topic at COP28. But for those that need a little cheat sheet, I'm just going to share the link to the fact sheet in the chat that just gives a really brief overview of the links between demilitarisation and climate justice. Next slide, please. In terms of our agenda for this 1-hour webinar, so I will first provide a brief and really general overview of the outcomes of COP28, and then share a few key highlights of our participation in the UN climate talks. And then we'll hear from each person that was part of the official WILPF delegation. And then after that, we'll hear from other WILPF members who participated at COP28 and who will also have important reflections to share. And then we'll open it up for a Q&A, and we'll hopefully have around 15 minutes for that section, and then we'll close the webinar. Okay, so let me kick off with a brief overview of the key outcomes of this COP. So COP28 really has been a COP of many firsts. It is the first COP that has finally recognized that fossil fuels are the root cause of the climate crisis, and that the world needs to transition away from them. It's also the first COP that had a thematic day of peace as part of the Health, Relief, Recovery and Peace Day on the 3rd of December. And this COP also saw really an unprecedented and persistent calls by the climate justice movement for peace and demilitarisation, with a genocide underway just a few thousand kilometers from the world's largest climate summit. And so some are really calling this outcome of COP28 historic, and the beginning of the end of fossil fuels. But the agreement still opens a door to a lot of dangerous distractions and unproven and costly technologies such as carbon capture and storage, or nuclear energy and other faults, and also neo-colonial solutions and loopholes. And this failure to agree to a phase out of fossil fuels also means a continued free ride for fossil fuel-powered militarization, which is the aspect that we want to dive a little deeper into in this webinar. And before we hear from the delegation, I just wanted to kind of share a little overview of some of the work that WILPF has been doing at COP28. So we've hosted and participated in a wide range of both in-person and virtual events over the course of COP28, where we always sought to address the issue of demilitarization for climate justice from various angles. And we always combined global analysis and statistics with the accounts and the lived experience of those most affected and at the front lines of the intersections of militarization and the climate crisis. WILPF also coordinates, next slide please. WILPF also coordinates the working group on peace and demilitarization within the Women and Gender Constituency. The Women and Gender Constituency is one of the 9 official stakeholder groups of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we launched this working group earlier this year. And as part of our work together, we coordinated an action on demilitarization. And an action at a COP is like a staged protest between 30 minutes and an hour long, within the COP venue. And for that action, we had really diverse speakers from Pakistan to the Philippines, Colombia, to Mexico and Palestine, all of which spoke to the intersections of militarization and the climate crisis in their contexts. And the action really attracted a lot of media interest and also requests for follow-up interviews once the action was finished. Next slide, please. The WILPF delegation also participated in many demonstrations of solidarity with the people of Palestine. As I mentioned before, it really was, I think it's really unprecedented to see the solidarity from the climate justice movement for those affected by the atrocities happening currently in Gaza. And all of these actions and actions of solidarity really shone a light on the atrocities being inflicted on Palestinian men, women, and children, but also really made it clear that there cannot be climate justice without human rights. Next slide, please. We also followed the core negotiations, and we provided inputs on demilitarization for statements that were delivered on behalf of the Women and Gender Constituency. And Michelle actually also delivered a couple of statements on behalf of the Women and Gender Constituency. And in the picture on the bottom left, you can see Michelle and Aishka on the screen as they are delivering the closing statement on behalf of the WGC. And the man watching them is actually John Kerry, the US climate envoy. Next slide, please. We also participated in a really powerful march on the 9th of December, which was the Global Day of Action, with again, many shows of solidarity for the Palestinian people, and where we saw a lot of placards and chants that were drawing the connections between war and the climate crisis. And throughout COP, we also supported other actions and even led some of these actions, as you can see Michelle in action in the picture on the right, speaking at an action calling for the phase out of fossil fuels. Next slide, please. Also against the backdrop of the war in Gaza, and also as a result of efforts from WILPF, as well as other organizations and activists that are really have really focused their advocacy messages on the need for countering militarization, we really could see a significant increase of interest by media to amplify this issue, which you can see in this slide. So media attended the action that I mentioned, as well as other actions specifically on Palestine. And they also participated in our side events and asked follow-up questions. and approached us throughout COP and asked us about, our reasons for being here and our focus, and why we have that specific focus on demilitarization. Next slide, please. Also, our article on militarism being the elephant in the climate room was featured in ECO, which is the most widely read daily newsletter from Climate Action Network, which is the largest climate justice coalition in the world. And while the topic of demilitarization has not yet made it into the official core negotiations at COP, we really have seen an increasing number of also leaders and delegates making the connections between war, militarization, and the climate crisis. And one example of that is President Lula, who emerged from a high-level meeting stating, and I'm quoting here, "It is unacceptable that the promise of $100 billion a year made by developed countries will not come to fruition, while in 2021 alone, military spending reached $2.2 trillion. And similarly, the Climate Action Network's executive director, Tasneem Essop, also remarked in an official statement during COP that, and I quote, "It is immoral that rich nations cannot find adequate funds for addressing climate impacts, yet could instantly find billions of dollars, not millions, but billions of dollars to support a war on the people of Gaza." So we've really seen a momentum around this topic this year across different actors and stakeholders, which I think is really promising. But I will leave it here for now, and I'll turn to the delegation and hear from them and their reflections. So we were first going to hear from Nesma. Unfortunately, Nesma is sick and had to cancel last minute. It's really a shame, as we would have loved to hear from her, but I hope that she gets better soon. But I do want to quickly introduce Nesma because she's played such an important role as part of the WILPF delegation. So Nesma is the advocacy officer of the Peace Track Initiative. She is a women's peace and security expert and a founding member of PTI, and PTI is a partner organization of WILPF. So since Nesma can't be here, we are moving to our next delegate, which is Michelle. Michelle Benzing is currently an environment consultant with WILPF, but also is a member of WILPF Germany. Michelle, I think you can stop sharing your screen now so that we can see you properly. And if you could share some of your analysis of COP28's outcome as it relates to demilitarization and gender justice, both in terms of any wins as well as any challenges, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And it's great to see you all. It's great also to see all the members of the delegation who put so much work and effort into really putting the topic of demilitarization on the agenda at COP28. And yes, I want to dive deeper a little bit into like different declarations, different outcomes, but also the negotiation tracks, some of which Catherine already mentioned just a second ago. I would like to start with the Declaration for Climate Recovery, Relief and Peace. So as Catherine just mentioned, we actually had the first time ever a thematic day of peace as part of the Health, Relief, Recovery and Peace Day on December 3rd. And on that very day, we also had the launch of the Declaration for Climate Recovery, Relief and Peace, which was launched alongside a package of solutions. And this big package was endorsed by around 74 countries and 40 different organizations. Generally, it's good to have such a declaration and really put the focus on the topic of peace within the climate negotiation halls. Yet this declaration had a very specific and narrow focus on providing more financial means to communities affected by conflict and also the climate crisis. While this is super important, it very much undermined and neglected the need to address the elephant in the room, and that's what we consistently raised awareness about, which is rampant militarization. And by that, I think WILPF and several other organizations continuously try to raise awareness that we really have to address the root causes if we want to talk about sustainable peace. And even the foreign minister, Álvaro Levea of Colombia, noted, and I quote, "It is necessary to talk about global peace, otherwise we are wasting our time." So I think just like when we look at these declarations, it's important to have it, yet we were trying to put the topic of demilitarization into this declaration, and we will continue our efforts to actually do so in the future, because as long as we talk about peace, but not actually address what is causing conflict and what is causing or also exacerbating the climate crisis, we will not be able to achieve the peace that is needed. Secondly, I want to have a look at I want to dive with you into the global stocktake. So this COP28 featured the first global stocktake, which is a process to basically hold countries accountable and to take stock of the progress that is made towards the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And while we actually had the peace declaration on the one hand, the final global stocktake text did not include any language of conflict prevention in the context of climate justice. So we can also see a little bit like the different disparities between the texts or different declarations and outcomes. As Katrin mentioned, some countries really toasted to the historic global stocktake, as it for the first time after 30 years mentioned the need to transition away from fossil fuels. Yet at the same time, and we were there, while the outcome of the global stocktake was announced, those most impacted by the climate crisis were actually in tears because they knew this is not enough. This is not the result that we needed. The COP consensus, or we may also rather call it the COP compromise, opens doors to harmful solutions that Katrin mentioned before as well, such as carbon capture and storage. And I just want to reiterate that we are standing deeply in solidarity with those who reject this celebration, and we will continue to hold the line to really demand an equitable fossil fuel phase out. And at the same time, if we continue to fail to call for the need for a fossil fuel phase out, we also continue to give the green light to fossil fuel powered militarization. Basically, all these different topics are intersected. And WILPF and other organizations continuously tried to put the topic on the agenda through submissions to the GST, for example. So militaries are huge fossil fuel consumers, right? And the estimates suggest that the world's militaries actually contribute around 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emission. And this even excludes conflict emissions. So the several organizations consistently demanded the GST to recognize that there's actually a data gap when we look at these military emissions and the conflict greenhouse gas emissions, and demanded a transparent, mandatory, and effective reporting of military emissions. Unfortunately, to this point, it's not the case. It wasn't included in the GST, yet this is still, like an important way to continue to thrive with such an outcome. Next, I want to look at the aspects of climate finance. So throughout the first day, there was actually the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, and which is seeking to compensate countries most vulnerable to the climate crisis for continuing losses and damages. And this was also hailed as like a historic win. And why this is very a breakthrough decision and very crucial, the millions pledged so far are not nearly enough to pay for the losses and damages that have been caused and that will also happen in the future. So right now we're seeing around $700 million pledged for the Loss and Damage Fund, even way, way less for the Adaptation Fund. And compared to the staggering amount of $2.24 trillion that were spent on militaries in 2022 very much underscores the discrepancy and the shortcomings that we have when it comes to the prioritization of climate finance. And activists continuously asked, why is there always money for war, but not for the Loss and Damage Fund, not for climate finance in general? And while we see that existing commitments, for example, to the $100 billion goal still remains unfilled, there's also a lack of new and additional climate finance. And it was very interesting to see that particularly high-income countries were kind of downplaying their own historic responsibility to pay up, rather referring to voluntary contributions or the private sector to provide financial means. But I think this makes very clear that paying up and providing climate finance is a question of prioritization. If we know that those most contributing to the climate crisis pay 30 times more towards their militaries than they spend on mandatory climate finance, we know that these countries are taking the wrong priorities. We know that they're actively not reallocating money towards the needs for climate justice. So I think this is important, particularly if we look at the COP ahead, the COP29, which is going to take place in Azerbaijan, because the next COP is actually going to be a COP about climate finance. And there will be the new collective quantified goal, which will be agreed and approved at next year's COP. So we really need to urge countries to provide needs and also science-based climate finance. So I want to close by just saying that the cross-constituency peace and demilitarisation working group that we founded together continuously highlighted these challenges and discrepancies. And we did not only organize in actions, as just Katrin mentioned, we also very much discussed how can we influence the negotiations, how can we look at the different negotiation tracks, at the mitigation work program, at the transparency framework, at the climate finance, to really provide concrete proposals and examples. And I also want to thank the leadership of the MENA Feminist Task Force, who really helped and really put an emphasis of putting demilitarization on the agenda. And without their incredible work and the leadership that they really brought to this COP, we would have never been at the point that we are right now. And so I just want to end by saying a lot happened during this COP, and there's really this momentum to continue to work on this topic, yet we're also seeing we're still having challenges. Nevertheless, we built up an amazing movement and amazing groups who are willing to put the topic of demilitarization for gender and climate justice on the agenda. So please join us all in this call, and together we will actually make this happen and already prepare for the SBs and COP29 as well next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for this really detailed analysis, feminist peace analysis of the outcomes of COP28. That was really, really helpful and detailed, and I think helped us all to really ground ourselves in understanding the outcomes a bit better. So thank you very much for that. Okay, let's move on to hear from Ola. Ola Al-Sakaf is a Yemeni researcher, climate activist, and founder of Peace Environment for Development. And she's also a member of WILPF Yemen. Ola, you've participated in countless events and panels at COP28, both as a speaker as well as in the audience, with a specific focus on the context of Yemen. So I'd love to know from you, what do you see as some of the challenges, but also if there's been any wins within COP28 when it comes to climate justice in the context of a war-torn country like Yemen, and if you have any other personal reflections that you would like to share. And thank you so much for being here, because you also told us that you're not feeling well. So thank you so much for still being here, and I hope you can rest after this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. It's actually my first COP. It was so inspiring. Like, I think COP is a very important space, as it is the best space for climate activists for networking. It's very great to meet activists and people who are interested in climate action from all over the world. What I want to talk first about the challenges. I'm going to focus on Yemen because we are a country affected by the conflict, so maybe we have some other challenges that are not there in other countries. And I'll first start with the traveling. Traveling outside Yemen is the hardest part ever when we are thinking about any kind of participation. And I'll start first with the internal challenges. Most of the cities in Yemen are under the siege. The roads are closed, so it's not easy for us to go from one city to another one. The second issue is the airports. Like, we don't have enough airports in the city because of the war in the country. I mean, most of those airports are not operating anymore. We have just one airport with international flights and limited destinations at the same time. The second or the third issue regarding traveling is also the embassies. We don't have embassies in Yemen to issue our visa. The good thing about COP that we got online free visas from United Arab Emirates, but it's not the case in other events and participations, especially when we're talking about the international events. And then it comes also the how expensive it is to travel from Yemen to attend such events. Yemen is one of the most affected countries by climate change. A lot of women are affected, as Yemeni society, two-thirds of the society lives in the rural areas, depending on agriculture and fishing as main resources of income. And those two resources are now threatening because of climate change. We needed more voices of Yemeni women to be there at COP and other also international events, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case because most of the women, the Yemeni women in specific, are not able to attend such events. The second another barrier and challenge is also the language barriers. We are, or most of the Yemeni women, or all the Yemeni women speaks Arabic, and it is their only language. So it was very hard to attend, like for those who are speaking Arabic only, it was so hard for them to attend the network and collaborate with the others there, as English was the main language at the COP for most of the panels and events there. But I feel lucky to be part of the delegation of WILPF at this COP. I want to say that I just was like, I'm not optimistic at all, but what happened this COP and what we are trying to change, and some of those changes we are seeing in the ground give us hope to continue our activism, to continue our work toward having climate justice. The demilitarisation was so hard topic to include, but I'm glad that it was there, and many of the decision makers and many of the actors and many of the presidents and parties included in their speeches. So that was so inspiring for us to keep working. I believe that militarization is just the elephant in the room. It is one of the main causes of climate change in the world, especially for someone who came from a country affected for by the conflict like Yemen. And it is at the same time industry for most of the countries. So it's not something easy to talk about because they have a lot of interest to continue their industry. But what I'm seeing right now, the outcomes that Michelle has just mentioned, give us hope that in the coming years, this topic might be there on the table, and we might be and we might have a thematic day just on demilitarization.
Thank you so much, Ola, for sharing your reflections and also, really telling us about the challenges of even getting to the conference, which, others that live in other regions of the world don't even think about. So I think that's really important to keep in mind that a lot of voices and perspectives aren't even heard or represented at COP because it's so challenging to get there in the first place. So thank you so much for these reflections. And let me move to Rula Assad, last but not least. Rula is a feminist researcher and journalist, and she's a co-founder of Stitching Female Journalists Network, and SFJN is another partner organization of WILPF. So Rula, if you could also share your reflections and perspectives on COP28 as it relates to conflict, gender, and climate justice, especially with your background and lived experience on the context of Syria.
Thank you, Catherine, and also thanks for Michelle and Ola for also sharing their perspective, but also for the details and the overview, and also for the time together. It make it way easier because COP is a really big space in all meaning, a negative meaning most of the time for me, because it's where a lot of labor as a feminist we have to put in order to make our voice heard, especially in a topic where it's not on the agenda, no one is interested from high levels. Of course, some leaders, they mention it, but still it was a huge opportunity, I would say, that WILPF created to start to talk about demilitarization and to use the word, because also as I think feminists, we have to name it as it is. So some people try to use it, I mean, people, official, non-official, try to use other terms or to minimize or to put it aside the impact of militarization on a climate. And for me, as a Syrian, I already started my activism related to climate crisis in Syria back in the time 2008, related to the drought. When I look from the demilitarization perspective, which is I really appreciate WILPF to bring me to this space, also to think from a new perspective how to bring Syria as a context to a new conversation. Like when I start to think about, okay, before the war, we had so and so as a climate problem, but after the war, we already have, I mean, double and triple problem. Starting with the sort of weapon have been used, like chemical have been used in the country, and then also to look to this problem from transnational perspective. Like it's not only related to Syria, but also to the neighboring country like Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, or Turkey. So my reflection after COP, like, yes, it's a new layers to put it to any conversation coming to social justice, especially when it comes to conflict areas, especially when we are talking about intersectional perspective, when we talk about marginalized group. And again, I always want to mention, like, when it comes to militarization and demilitarization, it's not only during wartime, but also what it called peacetime, because the state like heavily prepare themselves and they have this race of being well militarized, and like that not being criticized, I think, enough. So that first, like how the new perspective for me as a researcher, but also as a journalist, and I already shared with Catherine, like an article about demilitarization when it comes to Syria, like it's a start to come to my, like, eating my my mind, because I feel the need, the urge to start to talk and to write about it from feminist perspective. Also, the day, the 3rd of December, was a very important day when with WILPF the act like happened, because again to bring different layers of one injustice. So we were like highlighting the demilitarization, but we also centering the human rights. We are centering women voices. We are centering peace and what feminist peace means in small talks and interview to the media, but still it's the start, and they see it as a really strong start. In the place where I think it's very important to fight from within. So I see COP, it's one of these big conferences, a lot of also things happen, a lot of labor have been like put there, but also a lot of energy have been sucked because of such like big conferences around something that important. And that big, but also how important to fight from within when it comes to the climate crisis, and how that's related to gender, but also to peace. That was very important. Also, after like, for me, it's like 10 days, how to see this from a distance. It was very, very, very important. And last, I think, the challenge for me was actually really how to bring the context to the conversation about demilitarization context, like how to make demilitarization when it comes, of course, to like big calculation, which is very important, like also to see how it reflects on people lived experience. And that was also a challenge, because like academics or research centers, they can't tell us what that means when it comes to expenses or what's mean to the impact, but then how to look to it from human rights perspective, lived experience. It was also something to think about it, but it's also valid to bring to the conversation. So that was a challenge, but at the same time, it's an eye-opening for me, because again, for me, it gave me a new tool to talk about Syria from a different perspective, but also how that linked to Yemen, because with Nesma, we have a podcast only in Arabic. Unfortunately, it's also published on WILPF Social, that we talk about the link between Yemen and Syria and how we talk about the same topics from a different context, like militarization, demilitarization, peace. Are we talking here about luxury topic, like it's a climate, why it's not anymore, it's luxury. It's very important to talk about it and to link it to the other topics. So it's a lot, actually. After 10 days, I realized I carry after COP. I really, now after 10 days, there's a lot of moments, like when you showed Catherine what happened. It's like really a very, very important moment during COP, whether in solidarity with Gaza or whether also to bring other voices to the public space and to stand in a solidarity with other communities. So thank you for this experience. That's my little intervention today.
Thank you very much, Rula, and thank you, to all of you for sharing your unique analysis and perspectives. I think it's just amazing to kind of learn what each of you have taken away from this experience, and I think you put it really well in terms of the overwhelming space that is COP, and that it sucks a lot of energy, and it can be really frustrating and daunting, because it is, especially this topic, right, is we're still at the very beginning of bringing this into the space. But at the same time, it is also a space where we can show solidarity, and it is really being seen and recognized by the global public attention through, the media attention that is being received and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm not trying to summarize everybody's entire interventions. I'm just picking out what I thought was interesting. So now we have a bit more than 20 minutes left, and what I'd love to do now is to hear from some WILPF members that were also participated at COP28, and to kind of hear their reflections on what has just been shared, and maybe share one key highlight from their participation and perspective. And the first person that I would like to give the floor to is Shireen Jurdi. Shireen is a member of WILPF Lebanon, but she's also was a very active member of the MENA Feminist Task Force that Michelle also mentioned earlier, which is the MENA-led coalition within the Women and Gender constituency, which really spearheaded the demands of feminists in the region at this COP. And Shireen, you also really worked tirelessly at COP28 to amplify the atrocities that are happening in Gaza, and how this links to climate discussions. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you, your reflections, if you've got any thoughts on what's been shared, and maybe one key highlight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Katrine. I think I agree with everything that has been said, and everything also represents me. What I would like to say, and the challenges were many, including logistics due to space, due to inclusion. But I think we had a window of opportunity, and we were able to have it. We used to say there's no peace without us, but now we have other things to say, that there's no peace without climate justice. There is no peace without having this narratives that has been shifted with COP28, and that we were part of the process. I think this is one of the takeaways, and I think moving away from silos. We cannot work on women, peace, and security. We cannot work on climate change per se if we do not work in an intersectional approach. Last thing I would like to say is that I was very happy to be part of the process. I was very happy also to be to make the suffering of the people in Gaza visible to everybody, and with the slogan that we had, there can be no climate justice on occupied lands. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Shireen. And yeah, I think, as you say, the narrative shift that we've seen at COP28 is really, really significant. Really, the breaking out of the silos and making these connections has been really extraordinary to see. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Next, we will hear from Tamara Lawrence. Tamara is a member of WILPF Canada, and she joined COP as part of Climate Action Network Canada delegation. Tamara, can we hear from you and any reflections on what you've heard so far, and then one key highlight from your participation?
So good afternoon, everyone from Canada. I'll just begin quickly by saying that I was on the Climate Action Network Canada delegation representing the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and WILPF Canada. And I would like to express my deep appreciation to the WILPF delegation for their effective mobilizing and campaigning for demilitarization, for climate justice and gender justice. They were very effective and also had great social media and communications during COP28. I would also like to add to what Michelle said in terms of her overview about the outcomes of COP28 and say that I'm going to put a link into the chat of the Indigenous Environmental Network, and just to lift their voices, because they had some very important reflections on the outcomes from the COP. And so I will link that into the chat. And I would also just like to emphasize that the Indigenous leaders were also very effective in calling for demilitarization for climate justice as well. And then two quick key highlights. One is I was able to make interventions at high-level meetings by the IPCC and UNEP about the problems of military emissions and military spending, and talk to key UN officials, UNFCCC officials, calling for action. The other thing that was significant, Shireen and I participated in a closed session by the US Climate and Gender Negotiator and the US Global Ambassador for Women. They reached out to the women gender constituency and asked to have a meeting with women climate activists, and it was called a listening session, and we were able to express our concerns and to share the WILPF messages around, peace for climate justice, demilitarization for decarbonization and decolonization, cutting military spending for climate finance. And we were also able to say that if the United States and other countries continue with their carbon-intensive militarism and wars and military spending, it would be impossible for us to achieve the Paris Agreement by 2030 and also to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So she listened to 30 women activists over the course of an hour and assured us that she would take our concerns, to the US team. But what this meeting represented to me was a feminist best practice. And it made me go to the Canadian negotiating team and say that the Canadian negotiating team should be having a listening session with women climate activists as well, not just during COP, but also during the year. And so this is an appeal and a challenge that I want to make to all of you in your home countries over the course of this next year, in advance of COP29. Call on your government to have a meeting with your gender climate focal point or representative to ask for a meeting, because over this next year, all of the countries are going to be engaged in a review of their gender action plans for climate change. This is part of the enhanced work program of Lima. And so this is a requirement. And I think that this presents a really important opportunity for us to get our concerns about demilitarization for climate justice and gender justice. It's one avenue for us to to get our concerns heard. So this is something for us in the new year. And I was really, grateful to be with Shireen in the room, and I thought that we made an effective and strong impact there. So thanks very much.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tamara, for sharing that. That's also a really great idea on how we can concretely take this work forward for COP29. And also big shout out to your pins, Tamara. I see you wearing one right now, Peace for Climate Justice. They were very, very, very popular. People were asking me all the time where they can find one. So thank you so much for all of your material and activism at COP28 as well. Okay, so last but not least, we'll hear from Hala Kilani, who is also a member of WILPF Lebanon and also a long-standing expert on the UN climate talks. Hala, you've managed to listen to everyone and might have some reflections and also your own contributions. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine, and so thanks for everyone's efforts in this COP. It really was. We went there with heavy hearts to participate and like work in business as usual while a genocide is happening. So we were happy to see that there was a lot of solidarity with Palestine, although the UNFCCC has imposed restrictions and did not let us express ourselves as we would and we should in solidarity with the Palestinian people. But I think all the vibes were very effective and impactful, especially in the UAE, which is a country that is not actually taking action against this genocide. So as far as the part of the greenwashing, there was also part of this kind of I don't know how we should call it, but yeah, this kind of washing of the actual injustices that are committed by many of these parties, and of course it extends to what they're doing with the fossil fuels and how much lobbyists were there for fossil fuels. So I really liked your introduction on how you analyzed the outcome. I was there in my capacity as part of one of the largest community of renewable energy actors, from science, academia, governments, non-governments, industry, across all the renewable energy sectors. So the organization is called REN21. It has members such as CAN, you mentioned, 350.org, Greenpeace, WWF, but also the Global Wind Energy Council, the Global Solar Council. And we were part of the charge that was for having an outcome. As you said, there were many firsts, and we've never, in all the 28 meetings of the UNFCCC, we've never had the words renewable energy and energy efficiency in the COP text. So it was the first for fossil fuel, transitioning away from fossil fuels, so recognizing that this is the root cause of the climate crisis, and recognize that the solution is renewables and energy efficiency. So we were kind of pushing for that language, and what we were demanding is a renewable energy efficiency package. And as you saw, it started with a pledge by 118 countries, which are now more than 130 countries that actually joined that pledge to add renewable energy capacity and improve renewable energy efficiency. But we did obtain that in the outcome document. However, our package, in order for it to be fair and inclusive, and many of you spoke about that kind of unbalance and the way many developing countries were unhappy with the outcome. We were very much trying to push forward or forefront the voices of developing countries, which are facing a lot of debt problems, currency fluctuations, currency devaluation, of course, economic crises. They have still not recovered from the COVID crisis, so they're facing multiple crises. And for them to actually implement the renewable energy target and to transition away from fossil fuels, they need finance. And much more than finance, they need technology transfer and they need capacity building, so skilling and reskilling. And also it is, I mean, as you know, renewable energy is much better in terms of like gender justice in the labor force, has more women. So it is, of course, in a just transition to renewable energy is very important for our movements and our justice narrative as well. So basically, we were part of that charge, and we are also unhappy with the loopholes that you mentioned, the nuclear, the CCS, because we know that renewables are able, if we actually have the political will, the finance, and the things that I mentioned, which is technology transfer and capacity building, all working cooperatively, all countries working together, we can actually face the climate crisis and meet the 1.5 goal if we commit to this transition in a just and orderly manner. And we also, of course, think that the sectors have to also move, the energy consuming sectors like transport. And this is why we also focused a lot on the transport. And you probably saw in the outcome document that this was mentioned. So there is a pledge and a call to action that it would be great for WILPF to join as well for a fossil-free land transport that we initiated with SLOCAT, which is one of our members and a transport member, and UITC and EITC, the transport associations. Yeah. Basically we are happy with some of the outcomes, but we need a lot of work to be done. And I also think that we all should also work harder for this, what we started on climate justice and the, demilitarisation to meet the 1.5 goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hala, for reminding us also about the first of having renewable energy included in the outcome document, and energy efficiency as well, which I think is really good and important. I think something that would have been great, of course, is also to have a conflict sensitive language when it comes to the renewable energy transition, right? Because we know that there's a lot of conflict potential, and we're seeing it already all over the world when it comes to the extraction of minerals that are needed for the renewable energy transition, and how that links to conflict and geopolitical tensions. But it's a great start. So thank you so much for reminding us of that. Okay, we have around 5 minutes for some short questions from everyone that's here. So you can either raise your hand if you want to ask the question verbally, or you can also write your question in the chat. And please, for those that are asking question, keep it concise. If there are any questions at all. Questions or reflections on what's been said. Thank you, Tamara, for sharing further information on the Gender Action Plan. That's really helpful. There's a question about Israel and how it acted in COP. Anybody knows anything, wants to take that? I just know that there was a activist came to an Israeli-hosted side event, and the moment that they saw the activists, they canceled the side event. So that's what I know. But is there anything? I mean, I think there's, if anybody wants to just unmute themselves and talk, but I think there's been a lot of behind the scenes that's been going on, specifically when it comes to the repression of what we were allowed to say in the actions. So there was a lot of censorship around, you know, what we were allowed to say, and I think that certainly must have come from Israel and its allies. Are there any other reflections on that? Otherwise, I'm just checking. Oh, great. Well, Helga, if you're doing research on that, please share with us once you've done it. It would be really interesting to actually know what the dynamics were there, for sure.
But just in between, yes, I will. I'm still writing, and it's really an expression of this transition word that they are still working on both. And in that case, I would like to use the chance to ask the question about Saudi Arabia, because a little bit before COP, Saudi Arabia came up with that they want to hook on gas and oil, and they want to develop cars and airplanes and buses that use up more of this fossil energy. Was there any protest, any mentioning during COP about that?
Not to my knowledge. Does anyone have any more information on that?
I just wanted, I'm not quite sure if you're wondering if there was particular mention of Saudi Arabia, as we were not allowed to mention any kind of countries or organizations during protests at COP. But of course, like many were raising, you know, like different actors without mentioning them, and, you know, like how they are basically supporting a fossil fuel industry. Yeah. But that was, you know, like on like different countries, but also particularly on global north countries as well, because as was mentioned before by Hala, there's like no transition possible and also no equitable fossil fuel phase out possible if there's no financing for it also by global north countries and taking up their responsibility and yeah, for historic emissions.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Okay, so now 2 minutes before closing, all the questions are coming in. Let me just
Katrine,
so,
if you don't mind, because
yes.
maybe you didn't see, there's a question on by Alicia
yes.
on the linkages between the climate and the health. And I want to say that we had a discussion, all of us, like on the last day to do an evaluation, and health was up front in the discussion. So there will be also linkages between climate change, gender justice, and health.
Thank you, Shireen. And then there's another question around if participants think that COP can be a catalyst for actual change. The $1 million question. Anybody wants to take that one?
It might be one of the ways, because I think we are talking about states, companies, and like fighting from within, and like also to be fighting from outside, or I mean, advocate for from outside might help to some solution. But absolutely, it's also to be aware of how much this like kind of like process, it needs like preparation, it needs sources, and how to be aware of that, because the question also about all this contradiction between going there, but it's Dubai, it's all the state, but they promise blah, blah, blah. But again, it's a space where a lot of people, they connect to do something outside of this process or system. So I think it's one of the way to some adaptation or mitigation or solutions.
Thank you so much, Rula, for taking that question. And I really apologize. I see hands up now, but we have interpreters with us that I don't want to take more of their time. So I'm really sorry, but I will have to close the meeting. And we will keep having a lot of these discussions in the cross-constituency working group on demilitarization and peace. So please, if you want to continue having discussions, then please join that working group. And apologies that we couldn't get to all of the questions. So I just want to thank everyone again so much for joining today, for our amazing speakers, and also to the WILPF delegation for giving their time and expertise and energy and participating at COP28, and also all of the other WILPF members that participated at COP. Thank you so much. And if you are keen on even more analysis and reflections from a feminist peace perspective on all things COP, then keep an eye out on the WILPF website. We'll publish an article, like a wrap-up article on COP28 tomorrow.